one of the top billed speakers. I come to them and you're always there and you're always doing great, actually. Right? Janet Gregory has been an Agile coach for a very long time, now getting on for more than 10 years, probably more like 13, but I'm lucky enough. So between 12 and 14 years. Remember. An excellent coach, an excellent educator, and with Lisa Crispin, what I'm holding this is got the introduction on the back, right? But with Lisa, she wrote probably the definitive book on Agile testing. So if you don't have this and you're in testing, I urge you to think about getting it. It's terrific if you will have it. And you can use it like a reference. You know, I wonder how I do this on the chapter. So Janet's going to share with you some of the work that's in here, some of the work that's not in here. It's going to be great. Janet, great.
So after an introduction like that, how do I start?
Was that too rich?
Too rich? Yeah, I'm sitting there going, can I possibly live up to that now? Welcome everybody. I have a little microphone thanks to Tom Poppendale. I'm losing my voice today, and so how am I going to talk for an hour and a half? But I'll come up with the microphone. It's not quite working if I put it down here. Does it work if I put it here? Not so much. So I'm going to hold it up. It might look a little weird. So I'm actually a Canadian. I live in Calgary. So that's my front yard in Maine. I used to live in Vancouver. I love Vancouver. I didn't get that in Maine. So, you know, there's times when I want to move back, but I come back and visit friends that we have here. And then go back to Calgary because that's where my grandchildren are. So far more important than the wedding. But I have been coaching for quite a long time. I've been coached as part of a team, sitting on a team as a tester, as a coach, as a QA manager, lots of different roles. The last 3 years I've been actually doing more training, more a lot of these kinds of conferences and things, some coaching, some consulting, but on a shorter term kind of basis. A little bit of each is fun. So today I'm going to talk about pitfalls and perils, because one of the things I find is teams, you know, it's hard. This Agile stuff is not easy. And it seems to be especially hard for some of the testers that come in. Because all of a sudden they're used to being after the fact, throw it over the wall, and now we're just, you know, too many times I see, whoa, we're going to disband the team. You're no longer on that independent test team. Let's throw you into the Agile team. Have fun. So there's a lot of different issues that go on. So we're going to talk about, I'm going to talk about 5 different perils that I've seen. There's lots more. It's pretty, you know, full of different issues. I'm going to talk about how to identify them. What are the red flags? Then I'm going to talk about why it's risky. Why do we not want to do that? And then I'm going to end up with each of these on some tips, some ideas, techniques to avoid them. What I'm going to do is I'm going to, for each of these 5 that we talk about, I would really like to have a little Q&A at each one, because I find that's just a lot easier. It makes sense to talk about it when we've got it open. So when we've got a tester, how many testers are in the room? Would you consider yourself a tester? Background. How many programmers? Ah, excellent. Do we have any like product owner kinds of folks? None. Too bad. All right. So we got to, you know, it's almost half and half. Because developers are testers too, just in a different way. From a testing perspective though, we've got a lot of changes. We're still doing the same job, we just have to do it differently. Instead of after, we're doing it in real time. And, you know, it's constantly changing. Nothing is static. It was always an illusion before, but now it's real. We recognize it. And people keep saying we have to automate all the tests. We don't really automate all the tests. Lisa Crispin, my co-author, has wrote a book in 2002, I think it was, Testing XP. Chapter 19, most controversial chapter ever come out, said automate all tests. You can't. We recognize that. You can't do it all. But we can try. And I understand that the talk that was just in here was kind of saying, maybe we want to think about it a little bit differently. You know, maybe we could start thinking about it as design and different things. But it's interesting and it's always changing. The biggest part is we're part of not a test team, but a project team, an agile team, whatever team you want to call yourself. It's different. So these are the 5 perils I'm going to talk about. Number 1 is waiting for Tuesday's build, and I'll explain what I mean by that. Another thing I see is testers, I just said we're part of this team, this project team, but quite often we're really not. It just looks that way. Maintaining a quality police mindset. So if we come from that traditional place and we're still trying to bring those things in, it hurts us. And then the manual testing, of course. And the last one is forgetting the big picture. Let's talk about each of those independently. So waiting for Tuesday's build. I named this because I was sitting in having lunch with a friend of mine out in McDougall Square in Calgary. It was summer, it was grass. Sitting having lunch. And I said, so how's your team going? Because they had just started doing Agile, and she's a contractor and started working with them. And she said, well, it's actually okay. You know, everything's going okay. We're doing our daily stand-ups. We're doing this. She said, but I'm still finding it really hard to test. I don't know how you can possibly keep up. And I said, what do you mean? And she goes, well, you know, by the time they give us the build on Tuesday, and I went, stop. What do you mean by the time? Well, we get it once a week, every Tuesday. And I went, huh. So I named it after Sherry. Waiting for Tuesday's build. It's really easy to spot this. The clues, the red flags. If you've got a physical storyboard, I'm standing in conflict. If you've got a physical storyboard and your testing tasks, you know, if they're all sitting in over here to review, but all the development tasks are over here. Easy clue. You can see it. You know, the stories, harder and harder to mark done. They get carried over because they're not tested. If I'm getting a build every Tuesday, I know that I'm not testing deploys. Not happening. It's not getting tested. There's a lot of risks associated with this. This is probably my number 1. We end up with a mini waterfall, whether or not you're testing at the end of the iteration, carrying things over, whether or not you're testing in the next iteration. It's a mini waterfall. Make no mistakes, that's what it is. Not a good thing. Those stories never get completed. I can't give my feedback. It's all about feedback. Reducing that feedback cycle. If I'm not testing till the next iteration, I know that those stories, the bugs I do find, they're not going to get fixed. The developers are onto something different. It's going to be, you know, put in there. I know that's what's going to happen is we're going to have a stabilization, hardening, whatever kind of iteration you want to call it, bug fix cycle. I want to be testing the stories in the same iteration. My technical debt, it's bigger. Bugs are a symptom of technical debt because we're not fixing it. And the more you get, the harder it is to clean up. I mean, this is a picture, I think this one is from Vietnam, but I can go to a lot of cities. And you know, the wires that all conglomerate, you can't get out of it. Once you get there, it's too hard. There's a lot of risks. One of the biggest ones I see is, well, we can't get the stories all tested, so let's change our definition of done. Let's make it developer complete, so that we can get it counted as our velocity. Slippery slope. We want to kind of watch that. Because all those tests and all that feedback gets pushed back further and further and further. And pretty soon in the end game, instead of just making it a big check mark, because we've been doing it all the way along, we have stabilization. We're fixing big bugs. It's a slippery slope. So, make it continuous integration part. Tester's best friend next to the developer. I like my continuous integration. I want my build when it's ready so I can test my stories. I have to be thinking about what that means to be able to test. So, you know, the build pipeline, being able to deploy into my test environment, to the development, to the test, to the staging, whatever that means. It has to be part of what we do on a regular basis. We need that build. We need to be able to test it. Quite often, if I don't have a continuous integration and we're still working with transitioning, because it takes a long time to get that going, I'm going to do everything I can to make sure I get feedback to the developer as fast as possible. I want to understand what the purpose of my testing is. So if I can work on his machine even, to give him feedback on the story so that he can fix the bugs earlier if there's bugs, that's okay. You know, maybe I can wait a little bit to get it deployed in my test environment. Another really kind of thing that I see is that testing isn't included in the velocity. If it's not included in your velocity, if you're only doing it on developer time, it's really easy to change your definition of done. That is not included. Make sure you estimate those testing tasks. Make sure it's included. You want to be doing that. And you know, use those retrospectives wisely, because that's how you're going to change things. Any questions about waiting for Tuesday's build? Pretty straightforward, right? Makes sense. Surprising how many teams still struggle.
So if you have Tuesday builds, what's the main reason for it? I mean, is it just the stories are too big or what?
Mostly it's that they really didn't put the time into continuous integration, or they don't think the testers are important enough, or the stories are too big and they go, yeah, we got nothing to give you anyhow, so you may as well just wait till Tuesday. There's lots of different reasons why it happens, but a lot of times you get really caught up in getting your little tiny builds, but you're not worried about actually giving a build to give to the developers, to the testers. It'll be manually, perhaps, created.
Janet, for the sake of the camera, would you please repeat the
Oh,
question?
I'm sorry.
No,
Yes.
not at all, please.
Yeah,
Go
thank
ahead.
you. The question was just, why would you wait till Tuesday?
So, on the same kind of thing, is it legitimate to split the story?
Is it
You
legitimate?
find it's too complex here from the developer's perspective.
Is it legitimate to split a story? Absolutely.
Mm.
Absolutely. In fact, if I'm in an iteration planning meeting and I think the story is too big, if it's got more than one acceptance test, happy path, intent of the story, I'm going to go, you know what, this is a good indication that it might be too big. I have a rule of thumb. If I'm in a 2-week iteration, I want to be testing by day 3 or day 4 of the very first story. So, 2-3 days worth of effort. I might have a couple of developers working on it, but I want to be testing right away. It's kind of my rule of thumb for a 2-week iteration. All right. Number 2, testers aren't really part of the team. So we've got these testers, they've been used to being on a after the fact, downstream. We put them in the team and we say, go for it. So they end up, and they're sitting there in the iteration planning meetings, or in the release planning meetings. They have no idea about what their role is. They've been told to sit quietly. Just listen. Now, if you're getting and you're starting to test, and you're going to the developer and saying, hey Tom, what was this story about? That's a really good indication that those testers aren't part of the team. They've either not been in the iteration planning meeting, they're not paying attention. They're testing what the developer tells them to test. Really big clue. They're sitting in the corner and not asking questions. That's what they're there for. We want them to be part of the team. Now, some of the risks, and these are really big ones. We make assumptions from a testing perspective. So then we're testing and we're putting in bugs that don't exist. Or, you know, some of those the big picture kinds of assumptions we want the testers to be, to help us understand, aren't there. We're finding a lot of little things, or sometimes big things. All of a sudden, scope creep. Why are we, how come this story took longer? Start asking why. A lot of times it's because of the impacts to other parts of the system. Testers didn't ask the questions, or they weren't there to ask. Because they're the ones that are looking at that big picture. And we're really, you know, not using everybody's skills. That's a risk. It is. A lot of those things that we are trying to get around, bringing testers into the team so that we're all sharing that common understanding, we lose it. Because it is an us against them, no matter what you're trying to do. It's really hard to bring us all together. Now, one of the game I play a lot of times in some of the sessions tutorials I do is I have this little picture game. And I have a set of 8 requirements. I give it out to the developers, to the testers, a little piece of paper. I give them these shapes. And I said, follow the requirements, developers. Build me a picture according to the requirements. So they go off and they do. I give it to the testers and I say, so figure out how you're going to test it. It's something that, you know, we've always done. Some things are very ingrained in us. Every time I do this, I never tell the testers, don't talk to the developers. I never tell the developers, don't talk to the testers. The only thing I do is I say, developers sit at this table and do it. Testers sit at this table and do it. Nobody ever crosses that boundary between, there's maybe 4 feet. They do not cross. They do not ever ask a question. Simple logistics. Now, what it's supposed to look like is something like this. Because when we do the same exercise, but have the team and they can ask questions, all of a sudden the developers are, you know, they're there and the testers start asking questions like, is the paper supposed to be portrait or landscape? Does it matter whether or not you have the triangle upside down or right side up? The questions that are asked help give a shared code, a shared understanding of what's trying to do. We get a completely different picture than when we try to do it alone and follow. So you really want to understand what's going on. So that whole team attitude, working together, you have to encourage it on a really regular basis. As soon as you hear anything that sounds like us versus them, oh, the testers don't know what they're doing. The testers don't. The developers don't. When you hear that, stop. Really consider what's happening. You want to be sitting with each other You want to be giving immediate feedback. Power of three, and I've heard it called a lot of different things, three amigos. There's lots of different phrases. I called it the power of three, and what happened, and the reason we got there was my developers were talking to the customer quite often, and as testers, because we had a logistical problem in the area that we're at, we were being excluded. Brought it up at a retrospective when we made the power of three, which meant that it was common and it was okay to go and interrupt a conversation between the product owner and the developer. Are you talking about a story we should know about? It's really a good idea to have all three talking about every story so that you know what's going on. As a tester, one of the biggest value added that I can do is make myself useful. What value can I add? How do I build my credibility? I need to be part of the team. I really need to understand what my role is and how I can help. By questioning, by raising assumptions, by asking things. Sometimes it's just showing that elephant in the room, saying, did you think about this? You need to be useful. Any questions about the whole team? Because that's what it's about, making the testers part of the team.
The exercise that you said that you separated the developers and not people, testers and not people. Do you think that the reason they didn't cross, that maybe it was implied that originally you separated them, that that's why they didn't cross, rather than they didn't want to include them?
So, yeah, so the question is on my exercise, is it an implied that they can't talk because I separated them? It might be, and that's obviously what they had taken out of it. When we made that power of three rule in this one organization, developers sat over here, testers sat over there, and it was about probably 20 meters, logistics. And we had to try real hard to cross that. Chocolate works really well. I just kind of, I started by saying, you can come and have a piece of chocolate anytime you want, developers, but you have to ask me a question. I don't care what kind of question. You can ask me what I had for supper last night. I don't care. But pretty soon, once we started getting that and breaking down that barrier, they actually found out it wasn't that long a walk. But we make assumptions, and I didn't say anything. The assumption was you can't talk to the testers. And those assumptions are everywhere. It's everywhere.
In the planning meeting, for a tester, do you think it's worth to have their own story? For example, like building up an automation test framework, a basic structure and stuff there. Is it worth to have a separate story, or it should belong to one team story?
So the question is, should we have separate stories for the testers to build an automation framework? That's got a whole lot of answers to it. I want my tasks to be part of every story. So if a story says, create username and login kind of thing, I want my tasks to say things like create the tests, automate the tests, do my exploratory testing. I want them to belong to a story. If I'm doing an automation framework, I'm going to do it little piece by little piece, and it's a completely different thing. It's the same way as if we're doing an infrastructure for a developer kind of thing. They're setting something up. And I'm going to kind of put that out to something different, because that is a completely different thing. I want my tasks to be part of each story, though.
But I'm trying to understand, do you think it's still worth a story for that framework? Or it's out of that sprint?
It's out of my scope for my answer right now. I can take it
Okay.
offline. Yes. Okay. It's a technical kind of thing we have to deal with, but you still want to do it piece by piece. I don't want somebody to go off and create an automation framework for 2 months. Yes?
So, how can you solve communication issues between developers and testers when testers are asking too many questions and developers sometimes just refuse to answer?
Yeah. Testers ask too many questions. That's what we pay them for, you know. But part of it is testers need need to understand the role that they're at. If I'm in a release planning meeting, my questions I want to be asking is big impact. How big is this story? Is the story going to be affected? Is this feature going to be affected by my, I want to know the big kind of things. If I'm sitting in a release planning meeting and I'm asking questions like, are we going to have a drop down or a radio button? Wrong level of questions. So understanding that has a part of it. But that's what we're there for. And you have to kind of play with it a little bit. But we're there to ask questions. And if there's too many, I'm going to sit there and I'm going to say, what is the problem with it? I'm going to try to figure it out. And I'm probably going to take and say, can we talk about this? Why do you think these are too many? And I'm going to try to get an understanding. Okay.
Have you ever run into a situation where the testers not being a part of the whole team was in fact the test manager who was blocking that from happening? And if so, what was the
Fire the test
outcome?
manager?
What's that? I wish I could. No.
Yeah, and so you really want to be, and it's part of the education thing for everybody. If I've got a test manager and he's starting to block things, and I was just talking to one the other day and I stopped and I said, okay, let's talk about what your role is. Let's really think about this. Back up. You're not day-to-day operations anymore. You're a practice manager. And I'm going to go and I'm going to actually talk to him. I'm going to bring somebody in if I have to let him see that there's a difference. We're doing it different. But it's education of management. It's education of upper management. What does Agile mean to them? What are the changes for them? So if you've got a person who's blocking it, you'll want to try to educate them. There was a
Regarding to the first question, that if the tester asks a too many questions from the developer, it happens to our organization too, but it's alarming. Why tester asking question from developer? You
Yeah,
have to ask
exactly.
from the team or the business analysis or product owner,
So-
not the developer.
if the
So
tester is
developer
asking.
is not the team?
No,
Okay.
Okay, so let me rephrase it. So I'm going to make this kind of assumption, and I may have misunderstood yours too. If the testers are sitting there in the middle of the iteration, they're testing a story, and this is a clue that they're not part of the team, and they're going, should it be doing this? Is it doing this? How is this happening, Paul? Tom, what's going on? If the tester is bugging the developer during the story development and constantly asking, that's a red flag. Why doesn't that tester know?
No, already.
They should not be constantly asking the developer because they should be understanding what this story is. It might be that you're not talking enough about it in the iteration planning meeting. It might be something as simple as that.
And what if the developer gets it wrong, right? He passes the
What
wrong
if the
information.
developer what?
Get the story wrong, so they pass the wrong
Exactly, which is
interpretation
why-
to the tester,
Which
right?
is why you want them both to sit and have a shared common understanding. We're going to talk about some ideas on how to do that. The back.
And the other thing is, the question, the example you're giving was if you're asking whether there should be a drop-down or a radio button, that's a development problem, not a tester's problem.
Yeah, but if I'm sitting about how to test, I might want to kind of get an idea of what's going on.
Yeah, I know,
It
but-
needs to be an implementation thing,
Mhm.
definitely not a release planning.
Mhm.
I might ask at an iteration planning if we're talking about implementation stuff. Really depends on the story and what we're trying to do. But it's the idea of levels of question,
Yes.
how detailed do you want, that may not be applicable, right? So you have to know what it is and ask the questions, find out what's bugging people. You had a question?
Actually, more a comment,
Yep.
so that if the tester is asking too many questions, it suggests the story is not well enough defined or is too long.
Exactly. If the tester's asking too many questions, it might be an indication the story is not well enough understood or too large. Yes, absolutely. So keep asking and figure it out. Go back to those retrospectives and bring them up, make it visible. Okay. Quality police mindset. This is a disturbing one to me, and I still see it. Because we have this, it's a carryover. I need to measure everything. Therefore, I better put every bug in my defect tracking system. because otherwise they're gonna get lost. I can't measure, I can't, there's a lot of different things, reasons why. Now, I still see those testers sometimes as part of a separate test team. Now, I've got to say more and more, if it's a separate test team, it's usually on the other side of the ocean. That's a different problem. But, you know, if your testers are sitting apart and not sitting with the developers, my favorite place is sitting in the middle of two developers, not if they're pairing. But I want to be right there. I want to be listening. You know, if your testers, I say can stop production. I don't see it very often, but they get the recommendation. They say, yeah, I don't think we should be able to go on. Or the QA manager says, yeah, I don't feel this is good enough. Those are indications that there's still, we're being quality police. That's not what we're about. Part of that whole team thing is making sure the team has shared responsibility for quality. We don't want to be doing this anymore. It's not a lot of fun to be in that situation, and it sets us aside. Because if that team, if those developers, you know, they go, yeah, those testers, they're there. They're watching our quality for us. They don't take responsibility, and we want them to. I want the whole team to. We get way better code if everybody really does understand that. I don't want to be a safety net. It's not fun, because people start getting sloppy. I hate when we start, and when you've got a distributed team on different sides of the ocean, or in different states, countries, provinces, when you start putting all your bugs in and you start using that defect tracking tool as a communication device, it's the worst one on earth. Way worse than email. It's just bad. So I want to get rid of it. Because what happens is that team we're trying so close to get, you know, peace. They're never going to. They're never going to, because they don't trust each other. They're putting everything through that ETS. So one of the things that I'm really trying to encourage from testers, and I get pushback, is instead of thinking about my job is to break the software, I've had people, on interviews, I go, so what do you think your job is as a tester? And they'll, you know, they go to do requirements to make sure they can do it, to break the software, to do this, to do that. But break the software is really often. And I know I had an interview over the phone one day, and I was working with a project manager, and we were doing this phone interview, and I had this tester. This was for an Agile team. 3 times in the first 2 minutes, I'm really good at breaking the software. And he said, that's good. And I went, hang on. We cut it really short. If I've got people with that attitude, and they're coming in, I'm sorry, I gotta pick on you again, Tom, he's just sitting there. Tom, found another bug. How do I ask those same 2 people to collaborate, to work really closely together? So instead of thinking my job is to break the software, it is part of it. Don't get me wrong, it is part of it. But if I start thinking about how can I help, what can I do to make this software better and contribute, what a different mindset. All of a sudden I've opened up worlds, huge possibilities. So the quadrants, these are the, how many people have seen these? Okay, next time it will be a lot more. So this was brainchild of Brian Merritt. He comes up with all kinds of good ideas. When I first saw this back in 2003, I went, oh, brilliant. Changed the way I thought about testing. The left-hand side, tests that support the team, support development. Right-hand side, tests that critique the product. It means I've got the product, the application in my hands. I can test it, I can poke at it, I can listen to it, I can watch it, I can throw it on the floor, I can jump on it. Whatever your product is, it's been coded. It's in my hands. Top half is business-facing tests. Business can understand it. It's in the language of the business. Bottom half, technology-facing tests, technical language. Now, if you look at this, it's kind of interesting because nowhere on here does it say testers are responsible for testing. It's a bunch of different people, a bunch of different kinds of tests. It's about the purpose of testing. What are we trying to accomplish? So quadrant 1, technology-facing tests that support the team. These are, the unit tests. Testers or the developers are doing their TDD, test-driven design, development, whatever you want to call it. They're automating those unit tests. They're supporting the team. If they're doing TDD, they're supporting their development. Quadrant 2, business-facing tests that support the team. This is probably what is the most different in Agile, because all of a sudden we're asking people to write tests before they start coding at a functional level. There's all kinds of different things. Every time I use an example, it's helping clarify requirements. Every time we do a paper prototype and show the customers, we're testing their understanding. We're testing assumptions. Very, very powerful. Some are automated, some are manual. 3, business-facing that critique the product. That's kind of where I want to probably break the software, my exploratory testing. All the testing that I didn't think of before the developer started coding. User acceptance testing falls into that because it's critiquing the product. Usability, those kinds of things, workflow, all critiquing the product from a business point of view. And then quadrant 4, which is originally where Agile really fell down on it. We didn't talk about this quadrant. We talked about customer tests, and we talked about developer tests. And this quadrant kind of got lost in the shuffle. Not to say it was less important, it just kind of got lost. But it's business or technology-facing tests that critique the product. So all of the load and performance, the utility tests, reliability, maintainability, interoperability, accessibility, blah, 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 blah. There's a bunch of them. It gives us a common way to talk about testing. Ones that don't put the developers to sleep. Ones that don't put managers to sleep. It's a nice, easy way to do it. We can think about doneness in different ways. It gives us a really powerful kind of tool, of a guideline, a model. There's no hard and fast rules. Some tests don't fit very nicely. I can sit there and one of the exercises I do is I say, testers, write down all the tests you do. Where would you put them? And every once in a while I go on the line, because it's not black and white. But think about why you're doing it. Am I trying to support development, or am I critiquing the product? Which is more beneficial? Where can I help deliver the right thing? We want to move them left. We want to get them up front. So it is. If the focus is on team, on the whole team, so you want to be thinking about that, because we all take part. We all have responsibility. Now, people keep trying to define acceptance test-driven development, and I've been using this picture for a while, and I'm not completely happy with it, but I haven't figured out a better one either. So, I have our story. Customers created the story, it's been prioritized, we figured it out. We create a test. Customer is supposed to be responsible for it, product owner. Take your choice of words. They write the acceptance tests to do the intent of the story. I like it to happen before the iteration planning meeting, because to me, those acceptance tests define the scope of the story. It allows me to ask questions against the story. It gives us our basis for conversation. So I'd like it before we get into iteration planning, but quite often it doesn't happen. So then as a team, before we just start discussing that story, I want us to come up with our acceptance tests. What is it? What does it mean? What's your desired behavior? Can you give me an example? What happens if at least one desired behavior and one misbehavior? We get that, we have our conversation, we walk out of the iteration planning meeting, now the real work starts. Developers don't start coding immediately. I don't know a single developer that runs out of the iteration planning meeting and starts developing. They start thinking about what they're gonna code. They start, checking stuff out. What do we have to change? What classes do I? They start figuring it out where it's gonna go. As a tester, I've been sitting there thinking about my variations in my iteration planning meeting when we're talking. I go out and I create the rest of my variations. What are my tests? What are the rest of the story tests I need? I can give those to the developers, and I'm going to use them as a collaboration tool. I've got my list. Here's all the things I'm going to test. How are we going to, we need a new fixture because we're using fit. So what do you think this fixture might look like? How can we automate this? We'll talk, we'll collaborate, we'll go through the tests. He has a good understanding now of the things. We might have even clarified a few things. We're going to automate, because we've got a couple of tasks. He's making the fixture and I'm specifying the tests. The automation is there. I can now give it to my developer, whatever tool I'm using. He can write his code, do his TDD in little cycles, because he now has my higher level tests that he's going to keep running. By the time he's finished coding, my automation is done, is complete. Everything that I thought about before he started coding passes, because we've already talked about it, changed. My automation is done too, at the API level, under the UI. I couldn't go through the GUI because I didn't have any GUI before, so I'm doing it at the API level. I get out, Tom says, Janet, I'm finished coding, tests all pass. Can you show me? Can I show you? And I go, yeah. So he shows me. Any bugs found during the show me, because it's fast feedback, aren't bugs. Still in development. Gee, got rid of some more garbage. Eliminated some more waste. Didn't have to put it in the defect tracking system. Fixes them. All I have to do now is my exploratory testing. Chances are most of the things I found in exploratory testing are going to be input into new stories, or maybe something a little bit different. I'm hoping I don't find any real bugs. If I do, they're probably pretty good ones, and we want to get them fixed as soon as possible. At that point, customer says, yeah, meets my intent, looks good, story is done. It's a very powerful thing. If I do not have the automation, doesn't mean I can't do the process. I can still do the process, even without the automation framework. It's a good way to get into the habit and bring in an automation framework. So when you're defining things like done, make sure you have testing included. Use things like ATDD. Giving my tests first to the developers, make sure we actually deliver the right thing. The details are in implementation. At an API level, I probably don't care. But we're establishing a relationship so that we can actually talk to each other and understand each other. Developers learning about testability from a functional level. And I'm learning how to work with him and a whole lot of other things as well. As a tester, if I share what I know, if I'm there as a consultant, if that's kind of my mindset, it works a lot better rather than being, I am the quality police. I want to step back from that. I really do. Any questions on the mindset? Yes.
One question is, when we say we have a whole team involved for testing, for example, one developer, he developed a feature, so do you think it's fine, so he tests his own code? Or it's better to have another person?
Nobody should, I mean, I expect every developer to test their own code,
Yeah.
because they're doing their unit tests. But from a functional perspective, I would not ask him to test his own thing, because he's just testing what he thought he did.
Yeah.
If I don't have testers on the team, I'm gonna say, can you test his story, right? I might do something as saying, all right, every iteration, we're going to rotate. Who on this development team wants to play the tester hat this week? Right? And so I want to rotate that as well. But if I have testers, then it's different. Yes, the back.
Just a comment on that. We were a 4-person team for a while, and we had no testers, so we tried a bunch of different things.
Yeah.
And the one that worked the best is that we all tested one story at a time, fixed all bugs, and then moved on.
I like that. I like that a lot. I've come into a lot of teams that don't have a tester. So I really like that everybody tests that story. Do you mind if I use that on other?
No, not at all.
I think that's a great solution. Now, I've seen teams that don't have testers and are very successful. Normally what I see is those teams are delivering to, are more technical. They're doing a message handling system, they're delivering to other developers. As soon as the organizations, as soon as the applications have a lot of business on top of them, let's use insurance companies, banks, any kind of larger business kind of thing, it seems to fall apart a little bit because the developers cannot be constantly knowing everything, and it falls apart. But yeah, I've seen it successful. Yes.
There was 2 other things we tried before that. The first one was testing other people's code.
Yeah.
It didn't work because we're devs, and as soon as we got bug reports, we stopped testing. And it was interesting.
Stop testing as soon as you got bug reports.
You want to fix bugs.
Yeah.
And the second thing we tried is that single dev rotating.
And that didn't work because?
Because the dev had more voice than the tester, and than the previous tester. So they said, what are you guys doing? I'm bored out of my mind. Let me do something. And,
Okay.
So it.
So that's an interesting thing. The developers have a larger voice. That tells you something when you have a tester on your team, developers. Really watch that, because it can happen very easily. Even when you have 4 developers and one's playing a tester, it happens. Those testers have to be courageous and stand. Yeah. Any other questions? One more? Okay.
I would like to hear your comment on this developing your thoughts about the tester being on the same team as the developer. So some people claim that if it's the same team and there is no independence, then it is a risk.
So the question is, if you're on the same team, then I lose my independence. I get developer infected. Yeah, no, you know what? What I do get from the developers is I get a much better appreciation for some of the risks that are and stuff.
I agree with that.
Yeah, and if I am a tester, let me rephrase that. If I am a good tester and I know is testing from a customer's perspective, and I keep that, I'm not going to get infected. Now, if I'm constantly going and saying, can you tell me what this story does? I want to be able to test this. If I'm doing that and not thinking on my own, if I'm testing what the developer says I should test, then yes, I get developer infected. I have not used my brains. And that's a different risk. That's telling me that my testers are not probably the best testers in the world, and they're not paying attention in the iteration planning meeting, or they don't know what their role is, and they don't understand that they need to be coming from a different perspective. I haven't seen any, education, making sure that they understand, making sure that they give their tests to the developers first. It means that they have to stop thinking, they have to think about it first. So it's training, it really is. And if they're getting developer infected, it means that they probably weren't great testers to begin with. They've been relying too heavily on the developers. Or the developers are went into submission. automation? How many have testers constantly doing manual testing? Yeah,
That's two different questions.
yeah, and I tried to rephrase it, but how many, why would it be two different questions?
Well, there's a difference between having automation and having people constantly doing manual testing. We have both.
Okay, yeah, and only doing manual testing. Okay, so there's no automation, they do their full regression test manually. Yeah, there's still quite a few people. Now, what I see when that happens is the testers are constantly retesting things. Gee, I know that the developers fixed this, but I don't trust that it is actually fixed. So I'm gonna test it in, our test environment, and then I better test it in staging, and then I better make sure that it really didn't stuck. It's stuck, I gotta test it in production, right? It's a mindset. They need to do that, because that's what used to happen before version control happened, right? When I'm constantly doing that manual testing, I don't really ever get time to the really important stuff, the exploratory testing. Because I'm busy testing that the stuff works, that it does what I expected it to do. I'm constantly going back and making sure things work. Now, this one, let's see, making excuses to miss meetings. You know, many times I can't go to the iteration planning meeting because I'm too busy testing the last one, catching up. What happens? They miss the iteration planning meeting. They now don't know what's going on, and they didn't have an opportunity to question. They're playing catch-up again. And they're going to miss the next one and the next one. And they're going to be constantly asking the developer questions. And they're not going to be, it's a vicious cycle. Potentially shippable product at the end of every iteration. Answer me this. How can I have potentially shippable product if I don't do a full regression test every iteration? Anybody?
I have one question.
Wow, he's got a question, he didn't want to answer mine.
Yeah, so I need more definition of potentially shipping product.
Potentially shippable product.
Potentially shippable product.
So,
How do you define, because I understand that, okay, it doesn't have, it needs to be not completely broken. But for example, when you're working on a big system, and it's your first iteration, there's no way in hell you can ship that.
no, and so potentially shippable says, in my mind,
Yeah.
that if my customer thought we had enough value, I had enough business value, that it was good, that I want to put it out, then I'd be pretty close to being able to put it out. I would not have to do a huge integration kind of thing for 6 months before I put it out. Potentially shippable, if my customer said, you know what, this is good, I like the features, can we put this out now? To me, that's what potentially shippable is.
But then if your customer is happy, can't you put that label on anything?
Can you put it on anything? What do you mean on anything?
And with the project at any state, if they're happy with it, well, they're happy with it, it's
Oh,
shippable.
yeah, but I mean, there's other things besides. I've got enough features, we can put it out. As a team, are you ready to put this out? Do you feel comfortable enough that you can put this release out? How confident are we? And if I haven't done regular regression testing, that means that I better have a regression test cycle at the end. And I have no idea what kind of bugs I'm going to find. So, to me, potentially shippable means I know it's pretty stable. We haven't got any surprises. We've been doing our stuff.
So it's not a matter of if it's missing major features, whether or not the things that exist are stable.
It's got to have enough features for the customer to say it's worthwhile. It's got to have enough business to meet some kind of business need. But there's a second part to it, which is the team's responsibility, the delivery team, which is about stability. That I can actually put it out if we want to. I don't have to sit there and spend a ton of time. Oh, we've got enough stuff, but by the way, we can't put it out for 2 more months because we haven't done any regression testing and we have to stabilize because we've got these 100 bugs we have to fix. That's the delivery team's responsibility. Does that make sense?
I
still have more questions, but I'll ask you later.
Okay.
I don't wanna
Yeah,
hold on to
okay.
that, yeah.
So there's lots of little things. Now, if, and this is the risks, right? I don't have that automated regression test. So those bugs, you know, can they creep back in? Not necessarily, they shouldn't, but they have side effects because it broke something else and we're not even remotely aware of it because we're only testing the new stories. You know, and I'm sitting there and I'm trying to figure it out and I go, ooh, I get sidetracked because, ooh, I found this really bug. And I can't test my news stories. There's lots of little things that go hand in hand. I'm so busy testing old stuff that I can't keep up with the new, the technology. It's not gonna happen because I'm sitting there, I'm gonna sit and test the stuff that I know because that's where my comfort zone is. And all of a sudden, you know, I'm left behind because I don't know this new technology that we should have been implementing, and we could. There's a lot of little tiny things. One of the biggest ones is if we don't have some kind of collaborative test automation tool, I have a really hard time getting my developers interested in testability from a functional point of view. They don't care about it. They have testability at a unit test level, but they don't bring it up a level. And so we're challenged with that completely. So there's a lot of risks, and they're subtle. They're much subtler. So some of the things we want to start thinking about is what does that automation look like? Well, Mike Holmes' pyramid, that's the first place I ever saw it, is you know, unit tests, the base of my regression test. They run fast. Really good return on investment because the developers check them in, their build runs on a continuous integration, they know whether it failed or passed right away. Fast feedback at the API layer, under the user interface. Those are the tests that I can give to the developers first. I want to be able to say, hey, these are the tests. Pretty high return on investment because it's fast feedback. I'm not going through the GUI. I don't have to wait for the GUI to be finished before we specify the tests. And the GUI level. I'm going to need those. I'm going to need some tests through the GUI. They're going to look differently. They're going to be workflow. I want to keep it to a minimum kind of requirements. Maybe one happy path at a feature level. Maybe one misbehavior to show what happens if. But I'm going to keep them at a minimum because they're harder to debug. They break. They're more brittle. There's a lot of different reasons. Now, I put this other pyramid there because I've run into teams that, you know what, that doesn't work for. So I'm recognizing that, you know, it's going to change depending on the organization. You have to adjust. What is the fastest feedback? What can the developers automate that will give them a fast feedback cycle? What's my next layer? Really just kind of constantly thinking about that. What makes it good for you? What can we automate? I just finished a 6-hour webinar on automation, so we just kind of got that all in 2 minutes. But yeah, it's important because automation is sadly neglected, the functional automation. We don't treat it like a coding project. We think that anybody can come in and do it because there's some really cool, fancy tools out there, open source or not. If I give these automation to my testers who have come from manual testing, I know that they're going to automate exactly like they did their manual testing. And it doesn't work because it's code. We need to think about it. As a tester, I want them to be understanding what to do. Doesn't mean they have to code. No, it doesn't. Do they want to be willing to learn what it means, what it looks like? Yes. These collaborative tools make that very easy to do. You got to manage them. You have to be able to find them. You have to be able to show them because they become, if they're done right, living documentation. Goiko Adzik in his latest book, Specification by Example, talks about that. And it's, you know, it's the only documentation that's guaranteed to be up to date. If it's readable by the business, then we can extract that, we can see and we can show you exactly what it's doing. Doesn't say the system's right, just tells you what it does. You need to really think about how to do that. Now, exploratory testing, and I'm not going to talk a lot about it, because this is about automation. Exploratory testing, though, is what I want my testers to be spending their time doing after the code is completed. It's where they can find the real issues, things that customers are going to find. You know, we've got everything else done, it does what it's supposed to do, everything we could think about. We're looking for the abnormal. This is where I want them to break it. So there's lots of different kinds of things. Regular exploratory testing, having a mission. Now I did, in the show me, I sat there with the developers and told me some risks. That's a mission, I'm gonna go do that. But use things like your personas. If you're business analysts or product owners, you have personas. Try doing some exploratory testing using different personas. Use tours. James Whitaker has a book out and it talks about a lot of tours. You can even just Google it, it'll be on his Microsoft blog. James Bach has some stuff out there on tours. Coming through your system in a different way. That's what we want to be spending our time on. Not making sure that that scripted test runs again and again and again. That's not what we do very well. I want the testers to be thinking. I want them to be using their critical thinking skills. So if we take and use that automation and make it part of the iteration, make it part of the cadence, make it part of that rhythm that we're doing, it just is natural and you get it going. It's not as easy as all that, of course, but it helps. It helps that our developers are working at it and understand what we're trying to do. It helps with testability because we're doing it as part of a team. One of my favorite questions is, how am I going to test that? All of a sudden it brings them as part of that. It goes and works together. You can understand the power, the risks. And you know what? It keeps me interested because I get to learn new things. I'm not still doing the same thing over and over again. So there's lots of different ways. You want to make it exciting. You want people to learn. So, that little, 10-minute automation kind of thing. Any questions? Anybody disagree?
There was a presentation before this, and whoever presented was proving that
You don't need tests.
he was trying to prove that we need to delete.
You can delete tests. So was he talking about the developer tests, or was he talking unit test level, or was he talking about functional tests? Yeah. I was talking a little bit to Tom about that, and I wish I would have been sitting in there. Unfortunately, I wasn't. I don't know how you can, because automation, by the way, does not find new bugs. Once you put it in and it's running, it becomes part of your regression suite. It does not find new bugs. It finds side effects, things that you didn't think about. But it's a check. So Michael Bolton talks about checking, which is what automation does. Just making sure it does the same thing that it did yesterday. Testing is about finding new issues and things we hadn't thought about. So I don't know how you can do the checking, because I'm not going to ask my people to do it over and over again without the automation. Now, there's such a thing as too much automation, and I will agree with him on that, because I've seen lots of automation and it takes days to run. Loses all value if I don't get my feedback fast enough. So it's about the value, about the, how fast do I get my feedback.
Yeah, I also read that presentation, and my understanding on why the presenter said it, the automated tests require maintenance.
Yes.
And when the product matures, then we don't need that much tests. So then we
okay.
can eliminate some just to to lower the cost of the maintenance.
Yeah,
That was a good point.
And that is a really good point. And it's why I say that the tests need to be treated like a code, like a project, like code, because they need refactoring. If you're not refactoring and thinking about duplication, you end up with a mess. And I've seen that too many times. So the idea of, so if I'm automating in my iteration, and I have 50 tests that are automated for this iteration, for this story, whatever. When I go to move it to my regression suite, I may not move all 50 over there. I only may move 20. And I'm gonna make those decisions based on risk and a lot of other things. But yes, I likely won't move them all over.
Isn't it true, though, you should also make sure that if you're going to eliminate automation on one part of the system, that you indeed eliminate the cause of defects getting into that part of it?
Yeah, so there's a lot of pros and cons about different things, right? It's always trade-offs. If I eliminate the tests, I better make sure that I'm pretty confident that this code is never going to change, that we have good, solid checks in place so that we're not going to get these weird things in. So you really have to understand what you're trying to test. What is the purpose of this test? Don't go deleting tests, willy-nilly kind of thing. Don't just go take them out. Tests that are flaky. You know, I run them one time, they don't. It didn't pass. Oh, we'll run them again, and it passes. Got any of those? Everybody does, right? They're useless. Absolutely useless, because you cannot trust them. If you're not going to rewrite them so that they work, delete them. You do more harm than good. How's that for a statement? Yeah.
A question for the regression testing. Do you think it's necessary to frozen the code at the end of the iteration and to conduct a regression test? Or maybe just those code changes side by side?
So, question, do I think it's necessary to freeze the code to run my regression test? Absolutely not, because I'm going to be running my regression test at a minimum daily. It's going to run every night on the code that exists.
But at the end of your iteration, for example, product owner come in to test, he will take the
First
latest
story, yeah.
one. But that one has not been refreshed.
Sure, it's been run the night before, and it's going to run again tonight. Because a product owner comes in and says, we have enough value, does not mean that I'm putting that out to production tomorrow.
But I think maybe I need to clarify my question.
Okay.
Mainly concerning that manual testing instead of the
Manual testing,
automation.
No, so when you have manual testing, that's the problem. You have to, you're going to have a manual regression
At the end
cycle
of
at the end, and you can't, you usually can't do it in an iteration. Over time, it gets more and more and more, and you can't. So I'll tell you a story about Lisa, my co-author. She walked into our team. She went and she said, oh, we're going to do a regression test every week. So she tried to, and she goes, I can't do it on the last day of every iteration. Too much. Took it to her team and said, what are we going to do, team? I guess we'll take the last day and the whole team will do the manual regression test. Worked well. Guess how long they lasted before they started automating? Next iteration. Manual regression test sucks. It's boring. Nobody likes to do it. So don't. You want to run it all the time. I have some strong opinions. Yes?
In my workplace, automation is done separately in an automation team,
Yes.
which doesn't participate in any iteration plannings or anything. So have
Yes.
you seen that in your practice? What do you think about that setup?
Yeah, I've seen it. I don't like it because we're not getting the feedback. It's not being part of the cycle. I'm almost going to guarantee that you're using all of your automations through the GUI.
Yes.
Yeah. And you can't do that as part of it. So I'm going to, let's move on here. But I'm going to give you some ideas about what to do with that. But you want that API level testing. If I want to be able to support my team by giving them tests first, I want to find a tool to be able to do that. All right. One last question and then I'm moving on.
Very quick one.
Yeah.
So these are some great examples of why manual testing, especially regression testing, sucks and we shouldn't do it. Have you any sort of insights why teams still don't want to do automation when you introduce it to them?
Yeah, actually there's a whole bunch of barriers why they don't want to. Probably the number one thing is fear.
Mhm.
Just scared to try it. Skills is not on the table. They think it's skills, but it's not. It's fear.
Big issue with managers.
Maintenance, because they've had a bad experience. There's lots of reasons why. And it's not an easy thing to do. It's not easy to tackle. But it's, number one, I'm gonna say is fear. Plain and simple. If you get down and do a root cause, it's fear from a lot of different places.
Which skills do you think are your future skills?
Collaboration. So I can start in, and if I'm using a tool, so how I'm gonna learn. If I'm a tester, the first thing I might wanna do is go pick up Brian Merritt's scripting in Ruby and just start to work through it. It's a pretty good book to kind of do. But I can sit and specify tests and read Goiko's book on specification by example. I'm gonna go and specify tests. If I'm doing a login, I'm gonna say username, password in a table, Janet Gregory, password, I expect to log in. I can give that to my developer. We're going to work on what underneath looks like. He's going to do the coding for the fixture. All I need to do is specify the tests. Duplicate passwords, duplicate usernames, blank passwords. I can do that. So, and it's training, and it just takes time. And outside of this, I know, we'll talk after, but I want to get through the presentation. So the last one, and this is really common as well, forgetting the big picture. Really easy to, you know that I said rule of thumb, I want to be testing stories in 2 to 3 days. Well, what happens is we get these little stories and we test them and they all work really wonderfully. But they don't roll up to the feature level. Because we end up finding those integration bugs, you know. If you start finding those integration bugs late, start looking at why you're doing that. Why is that happening? One of the most common things is reports. I don't know why, they're just left till the end. You better ask why, because they should be thought of with the story. One of those things that testers can ask about in a release planning meeting. Gee, you know, we're changing this calculation. Is it going to affect that report? Or this calculation goes to finance, and I know we do that. Those affect a lot of things. You want to be looking at that. Just even the plain requirements bugs. Those are clues. They really are clues. Scope creep, adding extra stuff. When we're looking at these little stories and things, when we're looking at all this stuff, it really is little pieces. We need to look at that big system. One of the reasons I'd said before that as soon as we start looking at big systems with a lot of business information, we start forgetting. We need the testers, we really need them. We need somebody looking at the interaction between the systems. Got to step outside your team, and the developers, they're looking at code, they're looking at a low level. They're only seeing what's in front of them. I'm always reminded of the Charlie Brown. Does anybody ever remember the Charlie Brown? This was years and years ago. Jumping up out of the grass, trying to see out of the grass. I guess you had to grow up in the prairies. But it kind of reminds me of that. Developers can't see outside the grass. The testers really need to see that big picture. So you want to look at that. When the customer comes and says, I don't like this workflow, it didn't work right, I didn't like it, put it all together and it's not working, those are risks, because that's rework. It's a waste. If we don't know what that goal is of a feature or an epic, or even of the project, we lose it. We can make all those little decisions based on little tiny stories, and we sometimes make the wrong choices. Really need to be thinking about it. We need to make sure that we don't end up there, right? We need to connect those gaps. It's one of the things when we're doing ATDD, acceptance test-driven development. We're trying to show where we want to go. It's what we want to do. We want to make sure the thing is built, that we're building the right thing. Unit tests, the stuff that developers do, pair programming, it's making sure they build the thing right about inner code quality. Looking at the bigger pictures about building the right thing. So we can do lots of different things. I'm a true fan of mind mapping. One of the things that I'll do if I get an inkling that the story is bigger than I think it is, it's a great tool for release planning, but in an iteration, every once in a while we get this story in and you sit there and go, I think this is bigger than we think it is. We start talking about it. Jump up and draw a mind map. What is the customer, what is the product owner really thinking? From a testing perspective, maybe I can sit there and pull it out and mind map some of the things we have to think about testing. Whatever tools that you have to think the big picture, what does it connect with? Draw context diagrams, use state diagrams. There's a lot of tools out there to help us think about the big picture. We really want to do it. If I have multiple teams, adds more complexity. One of the things I found has worked, and there's lots of other things in the past, is if our teams are all working and they're integrating and they're doing a potentially shippable product at the end of the iteration, there's a lot of overlap on some of the testing, the post-development testing, things like interoperability, browser compatibility. So maybe the individual teams are testing on IE or on Firefox or whatever they're doing, whatever the main thing is, but at the potentially shippable product, when they've got a good, solid product, it goes to some kind of post-development testing team. Some with developers on, some with testers on, and can do that kind of other testing. Maybe it's the load testing, reliability testing. In one organization I was at, we had, one of our criteria was that we had to prove it was reliable 24/7 for 2 weeks straight. So at the end of every iteration, we dropped in our potentially shippable product, and we ran reliability tests on a separate environment for 2 weeks straight. By the time we got to the end game, we were pretty sure that it was pretty reliable. We ran one more set, it was automated, and we were able to ship. Some other stuff too. But think about what works for your team. What are you missing? It's really hard sometimes to do some of those tests in the iteration. So you really need to think about what can we leverage? Because some of the environments get really expensive. So there's different ways of thinking about it. You need to be thinking about the big picture, the release level, because you have multiple teams. Roll it up. Those touch points between teams, those impacts, need to think about it. You need to, using examples of exploratory testing with real world data, those help, right? Any tool that you can use to help you roll it up. I know teams that have made little rules that say, we are not coding until we get our tests first, because they're not automated. They wait for the tests. Now, something that I've been talking about, and I just wrote a blog on this, is the idea of, so here's something that I personally, and I know people in the room that use it, but this is a personal thing. I hate the word done. Hate it with a passion. Because to me, it's defeated the purpose of saying done. So why don't we call it story done? Story done might include, my ABI level tests. Those quadrant 1, 2, and 3 tests. Every team is going to have to figure out what that means. But let's try thinking about defining a feature done. Feature done. You know, multiple stories. Every feature has multiple stories, or epic, whatever you want to call it. Let's define acceptance criteria for that. So one of the things I've had success with is when we get this feature, break it down into stories, I have a product owner define an extra story called test the feature. We have acceptance tests on that story. I attach things like my GUI tests, my GUI automation. Maybe that's where I put my load and performance test because it makes sense at a feature level, maybe not at every story level. What makes sense to you in your context? You know, you want to start thinking about this kind of thing. Make it solid, make everybody understand it. Because that's how you're going to keep that quality as part of it. So those big pictures, keeping it at a higher level, rolling the stories up, is really kind of an important thing. And I see a lot of getting it. Any questions? Makes perfect sense, right? Has anybody ever defined a feature done? Yeah? I'm glad to hear it. 2 people only? Yes.
I've done it in a slightly different way,
Yep.
where I sort of have a middle hierarchy in my stories between epics and user stories, and I just call them big stories because it has a better name for it.
Okay.
So sometimes a feature will be a big story, too big to implement in an iteration, and I have to
Right.
break down. So it may have some acceptance criteria, but it sort of represents more than just the testing.
Right.
But it's the same concept, I
Yeah.
think.
It's the idea of rolling it up and understanding the workflows that belong to
Exactly.
that. Yeah. All right. So these are the 5 that I identified. You know, the continuous integration thing. You need to be able to get the last good build to be able to test. Because otherwise you'll never keep up. Really look at your team, look at yourself if you're a tester and say, am I doing everything that I can do to be part of this team? Can I be asking more questions? Can I learn a little bit more about the BA role that we don't have if you don't have one? What kind of tools can I use to be thinking about what kinds of tests or whatever I'm going to use? Understanding that my role is to help the team, not to be the police, because that's just an awful place to be. It's not much fun. I'd rather much be part of that team. Number 4 is that automation thing. It's not easy to make automation good. It's really, really hard. But start small, you know, agile, increment. Start, try, fail, start. Make sure you keep it going. And then the last one, not the biggest one, is the big picture. Really stand up above the weeds. Really look at it. Figure out ways your team can look at it and say, you know what? We are absolutely understanding that big picture. We're delivering the right thing. There's a lot more. There really, really is. The problems happen really fast. So if you can catch them, you want to do it. But I don't know if you can see this picture. It's a really cool picture. This is my granddaughter. She's it looks like she's climbing a huge mountain. It's actually only a pile like this big. It can be deceptive, right? But it's a challenge. So if you're learning new skills, try to figure out what you need. I don't have to be a Java programmer to be a tester on an Agile team. But I need to know how to talk to the developers. I need to understand some of the things that are going on in my automation so we can make it better. I want to understand what skills I can do and where to do it. You ask for help. Be proactive. So that's the book. There's a bunch of resources. This first one is a test tool spreadsheet, all the open source test tools that are out there with the capabilities. It's a great place when you're going to try looking for new tools. There's so many resources out there to look at. You really want to go try. Sometimes it's just sending an email. So, 5 minutes left for questions.
Where can I get this presentation?
I don't know, do they put the presentation?
Yes, we do.
Yeah, there is a word.
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Takes a little time, but we get there eventually.
Pardon?
Takes a little time, but we get there eventually.
Okay, so they're actually taping this too? And
Yes, we are.
But I'll give a PDF and.
That goes
somebody-
along with
If
it.
somebody emails me, I'll send it to them and I might take out my granddaughter pictures, but, yeah. Okay, any other questions? Yes?
So if you have limited automation resources, human resources, so what are the priorities? Like, for example, you have some existing features, stabilized features, and you've got new stories. So you want to put these limited resources on, like basically helping on task-driven design, or just aside just to automate the existing features first?
So I'm gonna look at it. I'm gonna look at the risks for my project. So if I'm wanting to start something with, at an API level test, I'm gonna sit there and I'm gonna work with my team and say, we're gonna choose fit or cucumber, whatever we wanna do, based on some evaluation. I'm gonna start with the next story. And we're gonna go forward from there. Now, at the same time, if we've determined that there's a risk for our legacy code, then maybe I'm gonna sit there and also say, so, Mr. Project Owner, what is the very highest risk items we have in our current legacy system? And maybe take a GUI tool and automate that as a safety net. So you gotta look at it and come at it from different places.
Can you recommend us some like automation tools or API level?
I will not recommend automation tools of any shape, because every organization is different, every application is different. You need to go back and figure out what your purpose of your testing is, what kind of tool do I need, who's using it, what are we doing it, are we doing it collaborative, are we doing GUI, am I doing .NET, am I doing Java, there's so many things that I will not recommend anyone for any team, until I go in and look at it. Yeah. Okay, one last question. Nope, that's it. Pardon?
That's why there was only one left.